welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. The transition to a green economy, renewable energy development, waste management, environmental protection, these were some of the top policy priorities for environmental protection and sustainable energy in Ukraine, discussed during the UN Environmental Forum. To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Marcus Brand. He's a democratic governance advisor at UNDP in Ukraine. Hello, and thank you for joining. So what would you say, which issues would you outline that are of great importance in Ukraine, that are very urgent in Ukraine concerning environment and were discussed during the forum?
Well, our environmental forum that we organized last week focused actually on individual solutions, basically on the questions of what can each and every one of us, both international guests in Ukraine, but also Ukrainians do in order to make a difference. The things that you mentioned are all relatively well known among policy makers. We also had the Minister of Environment visiting. We also had a separate event on focusing on climate change, more on the policy side. But in the afternoon, we actually tried a different format, and we really tried to ask the questions from the bottom-up perspective. In other words, what can each and every one of us do in order to recycle waste, in order to reduce waste, in order to save energy, save water? Because all of these small decisions, all of these small choices actually make a difference and do also create the pressure to policymakers, to legislators, to the government in order to shift policy priorities.
Okay, zero domestic waste. How realistic is this picture for Ukraine?
Well, it is not just a question for Ukraine, but it is a big question that many people around the world have been asking themselves. As you know, over the last even only 20, 30 years, the amount of garbage that each and every household produces has multiplied.
Yes.
And we all have seen the images from Attenborough's documentaries about the plastic pollution, contamination, not just on the top of the oceans, but deep on the ocean floor. All beaches around the world are essentially affected by this, and so it is also in Ukraine, where you cannot go to a single park in Kiev or a forest in the Carpathians or a beach on the Black Sea without being confronted with waste pollution. So this is an urgent matter that we have to solve both at the governmental level, but it does also depend very much on individual attitudes, individual behavior, individual choices. A few people around the world have tried to take this very serious and have tried to reduce their own personal garbage impact or even energy impact to almost zero. This is a very difficult thing to do, but it is something that I think every one of us could start thinking about. For example, by reducing plastic, it's not just recycling it properly, which is now already possible in some locations in Ukraine, but actually buying less of it and using different materials, reusing things. One very important factor here is clothes and food. Food is something that is food production has a huge impact on the climate situation, but also on waste. It uses a lot of water, for example. So the choices of what food we buy, that we consume, and also how we use it, how much we throw away of it, but also the clothes that we buy and reuse or pass on. These are things that do make a huge difference in total.
Well, speaking of water, it's no secret that the quality of water in Ukraine remains pretty poor, and the amount of water due to the climate change, once and again, could be not enough to be supplied to all of the people living in Ukraine. Now, what could be done to resolve this issue?
Well, again, we know that the water shortage is one of the biggest impacts that we already see worldwide as a consequence of climate change and global warming. It also affects Ukraine, not to the same extent as some other countries in hotter climates. There is sometimes a little bit of a let's say, a naive assumption that just because it gets a little bit warmer during the winters, that wouldn't be so bad. I think generally we see in countries like Ukraine, where this is not yet fully integrated into the public political discourse, that the general attitudes and awareness of the seriousness of the impacts of climate change is not very well spread. The same is true for water, for example. There is a general sort of abundant availability of water in Ukraine. It's generally in a green climate, not with fertile land, intensive agriculture that uses a lot of water. But the individuals often don't realize that water that is used doesn't automatically come back. There is a good water museum in Kiev, for example, that you can visit, where you can actually see, learn, where children actually can learn about the water cycle, and this is a very important thing. So children, I think, can play a very important role in terms of even spreading the awareness in their own families.
In general, how, at which point would you say is the level of awareness of Ukrainians about the need to be environmentally friendly?
Well, again, it's not just about environmental friendly behavior, but it's the general awareness of the seriousness of climate change, or climate crisis, climate catastrophe are other terms that are currently used for it. Last year, there was a survey that showed that in Ukraine, only about 16% of all people consider climate change a serious threat, whereas that figure is higher than 50% in most other European countries. That shows that there is generally a low level of awareness. In large parts of the population, this is not really taken seriously, because people don't really see the immediate impacts in the same way as people in tropical climates do when they have storms and rising waters. This is something considered in faraway Pacific islands, but not something that is really affecting Ukrainians themselves. So first of all, we would like Ukrainians to also open their eyes and hearts and see that they are part of a global ecosystem that they are also affecting. Ukraine is one of the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide in Europe, even though it has a lower developed economy than most West European countries, but because of energy inefficiency and old-style carbon fossil fuel-based economy, it emits quite a lot. But it does not necessarily always see the impacts of it directly.
How do we educate Ukrainians? How do we educate the population of Ukraine on the issue?
Again, here I think it's a combination of government intervention, government leadership. We hope that the new president, we hope that the new members of parliament will take this much more seriously and live up to the expectations, also not just of the international community, but of the people of Ukraine. And we also appeal to the general public, to each and every one, to the media, to people working in education sector, anyone who can reach out, but really every individual who can talk within their own families. Youth and children's engagement is very important, as we have seen with Greta Thunberg from Sweden, the young Swedish activist who has already reached many millions of young people around the world, including in Ukraine. So there is really a sense, we have to create a sense of urgency, a sense of emergency, because these challenges that we are facing at the moment are far beyond anything that we have dealt with so far. So each and every one who has a chance to reach out to other people is called upon to raise awareness, to encourage people to educate themselves, to inform themselves about what is going on. The amount of carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere now is higher than in millions of years. The acidity of the oceans, the water quality as such is much worse than anything we have seen. The UN just came out with a big report documenting that thousands, if not millions, of species are at the threat of extinction. So these are things that we have not really dealt with. So we cannot approach this with business as usual, with the same old compartmentalized standalone activities. This is a societal challenge. It's a global challenge. And the UN, together with all the agencies, reaches out to the general public, to the political leadership, in order to face that threat.
Thank you so much for coming here today and talking about such an urgent issue that needs to be addressed right away. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
That was Marcus Brand, Democratic Governance Advisor at UNDP in Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching UATV. Stay tuned for more.